cracking that one first. All right. Hey, welcome back, everyone, to Building a Business in the Middle of a Pandemic. Wow, let's say that again. Building a business in the middle of a pandemic. Hopefully you got a chance to watch our introductory show on what we're going to be doing within this series of podcasts. But we're excited to kind of jump into our first topic today. I am Nick Pione.
I am Ryan Smeltz, and ladies and gentlemen, he wasn't here for the first part.
I'm Gavin Vincent.
Gavin Vincent. Okay.
Better late than never, right?
No. You're perfect timing. Because what you're going to find is, I think, the diversity of experience that are sitting around this table is going to really speak well to market research. But if you saw the first episode, this is all about if you're an entrepreneur or you already own a small business and you've just got that idea that is literally burning a hole in your pocket, basically, right? It's on the back of your mind every single day. And you're sitting there and you're saying to yourself, is now the right time to start my business, or is now the right time to continue my business? That's what we want to talk about today. And it starts with a little bit of market research in that aspect. But how about we kick off market research? So I think it's okay to acknowledge one thing, okay? So I have a depth of experience basically in strategic planning. I worked for a big pharmaceutical company. My job at the time was strategically planning 18 months to 36 months essentially for a huge organization, right? So a lot of time spent looking at market research. When I was in marketing, I was on the strategy side, so doing market research, doing customer research, but also you don't have to do all that, right? I know you're very much of a person that likes to just kind of get going, right? And the market research can be all in your head, and that's good too. So what we're going to talk about today is not a step-by-step approach. It's more like, why is it important? And what do you kind of need to do? Whether you sketch it out on paper, put it in a PowerPoint, whatever you want to do, that's fine. Keep it in your head. Yeah. But I think at some point, unless you disagree, I think it's important to make sure that your market research is nailed.
Yeah, that definitely that's a great point. Just along that same thread, it seems like the market plan or the market research, it kind of ties into the actual business plan. Are you a proponent or opponent or of having a well thought out business plan before executing, or kind of go as you can?
And both can be successful. I read an article on a blog posting around, I'm going to get this wrong maybe, but Sarah Blakely, who founded Spanx, right? Billion-dollar company, right? I believe she's a billionaire as well too. Yeah. And she had a very profound statement that said, I never wrote a business plan. Never wrote a business plan. But along the way, she did a lot, I know from her story, did a lot of market research on her product itself. And it didn't matter that she didn't put it down on paper. She knew she was traveling in the right direction. So that's what we'll talk about today. Yeah. Are you going in the right direction? Okay.
I like that.
So you've got an idea. Could be a product, right? Could be a service. Doesn't really matter, right? You got an idea and you want to go with it, okay? So I think the first thing for me is, who's going to be your customer?
Yeah.
Who's your customer, right? You need to have a customer before you even jump into, we'll talk later about the persona of your customer, but who is going to be your customer? Is it somebody on the lower side? Is it 18 to 25? Is it someone in the mid-range, from 25 to 45? Is it somebody above that, right? You got to know where your idea or your service fits, right? There's a lot of ways to do that, okay? Unless you're first to market, if you're launching in an established market, do your research, right? There's plenty of resources out there. I know when we founded Trek CBD, and we were thinking about this category itself, we did a lot of research through Brightfield Group, also through Statista. You can look at Statista out there to get market dynamics in terms of how big is this market, essentially. But to get to our customer perspective, from a CBD perspective, it was all out there already. People had already commissioned thousands of dollars in studies, essentially, to do surveys and behind-the-glass research to understand who uses CBD. Right? Because if you know who's going to use your product, it makes this whole thing that much easier.
Yeah.
Right?
That's a great point.
Yep. Because when you get down the line, there's one key thing. And if you're not a marketer, if you have a depth of marketing background, there's one kind of key principle in marketing, right? Is that if you try to speak to everybody, you fail.
Yeah.
If you try to speak to one person, or one person thereof, you're going to be successful.
Yeah.
Because we all know, we've all seen emails before where you're like, it's whatever product or service it is,
generic.
I don't use that.
Right.
discard right away.
Yep.
Versus if someone's speaking to me about something, then that's it. So we did a lot of research on the front end in terms of the market size itself, right? Are we going to be able to be successful in this market itself? So when we saw with CBD, we saw that the market was somewhere around $1 billion and it was going to go to $25 billion over the next 5 years. Okay, we saw that. We saw that the average user was in that 25 basically to 45 range. Now, we definitely speak to other customers, but we don't speak to them in broad, right? We speak to those that specific demographic. We knew that if we were going to speak to those customers, there was 3 main things on their mind. They wanted to either think about anxiety, they wanted to think about pain and inflammation, or they wanted to think about how I can sleep better. So we knew we took it from a place where, okay, we got this large, bolus of customers available, right? The market's going to continue to grow down to, okay, what are the demographics of that particular customer base? And for us, it was exactly what I described. A little heavily towards female, although it's a close kind of a battle between male female. But then it also came down to the fact of, okay, so what were the basically characteristics under there? Well, they had to be, for the most part, college educated, married, income range north of 50,000, somewhere in there. So then when we started thinking about, well, you know what? We'd like our first store to be in Wake Forest, North Carolina, where we live. Does the market, the local market, support that?
All right.
And what we found is we were a great match for that market. So that's my experience with that, essentially. I'd love to hear from you guys on that one, too.
Yeah.
So with that, how much of competitors in the marketplace plays a factor in determining if it's the right business?
Yeah, so that's almost like thank you for setting me up for that one. That's a great segue because actually, once we had all that down, then it comes down to a place where, okay, what are we going to do? How are we going to meet the customer, essentially, right? Well, we chose to do a retail store. If you were to turn this camera around, this is a retail store. It's on Main Street in Wake Forest. We decided to do a retail store with an e-commerce business supporting it as well, too. But the main experience we wanted to create was a retail store. So then we dug a little bit more into the characteristics of what's on, from a customer insight perspective, what's on the mind of our customer. And what we found is that people are really interested in CBD. They're really curious about it. About 25% of the population has already tried it, but the rest is curious about it. They've heard about it from a friend. They might have seen an ad or read an article about it. But as much as curious as they were also confused. Confused meaning, is it legal? Is it safe? So then now we're moving from a demographics perspective to we know, okay, this is what our customer is going to look like, to now what's on their mind, essentially. Yeah. Customer insight, what's on their mind. We had that. So to your point, then we started looking around and saying, okay, so if I'm this customer in this age range, where can I go and buy products like this? And of course, the online space is really, really deep, and you can see a lot of online companies. But locally, what we found we found that the category was incredibly fragmented. Yeah. You could buy it in a gas station. You could buy it in some grocery stores, not all. In the existing CBD stores, didn't speak to that customer insight. Some of them were creating even more confusion. When you walked into the store, everything was behind glass. So it kind of gave you this feeling of, I can't touch it. And we all go to the grocery store, right? Is everything behind glass? No. It's all out in the open. So they were propagating into that customer insight. So what I'm trying to say there is that, in just to kind of summarize it a little bit, is the fact that if you've got that customer insight, you've got the demographics, then you can go into things like, how is our retail store going to look different than everything else out there? Yep. And not just look different from a colors, fit, finish, whatnot, but strategically, is it going to overcome those two things? Is it going to meet the customer that's curious where they're at? Is it going to meet the customer that's confused about whether this is legal where they're at? Or is it just going to create more confusion? So if you were to walk through our store here, we would walk you through all those components that we pulled from market research that we put into execution in creating a customer experience. And then when you get further down the line, been blessed with almost 40 5-star Google reviews, et cetera, et cetera. But nice. That's just one example, and it's not about Trek CBD, about how if you spend some time, whether you put it down on paper or not, knowing your customer, knowing your market, essentially, then everything else kind of falls into play if you listen to that insight. Now, you can ignore it, and you might have good reason to ignore it, but if you don't, you're going to experience a little bit more success.
And I think a lot of what you just said, Nick, so I actually have a few of his books sitting on the shelf I haven't read yet, but Sam Walton and his story about how he went and was doing research in retail stores, taking measurements and stuff like that to see, Gary Vaynerchuk talks a lot about this too, like how he worked in his dad's wine store and would just watch the customers come in.
Yep.
Where do they go? How do they act and react to different things throughout the store? So I think everything you said just kind of lines up with that. How are we going to communicate with that customer? What exactly are they looking for? And then, you mentioned the reviews, and I think that just speaks to you executing in the proper fashion. So.
And it's important because this is like everything else, right? You're an entrepreneur. You're on your own, essentially, right? So you're out there by yourself. You're doing everything, essentially. But it's a fun journey, but it's also an ongoing journey because now we're 8 months in business, and now we can actually talk to our customers about what they value about us, talk to us about what they would see. So this idea about customer insight, market research continues. And also, if you think about into the future, and we're hoping that we're going to be blessed enough to experience longevity, but how does your brand going to evolve over time? How is the market evolving over time? So this process never stops, essentially. The markets are always going to be changing, and you want to evolve with them, essentially. So if you always keep this in the back of your mind, and like I said, there's a ton of resources out there that are free and at your disposal. You'll always be there, hopefully with an open mind to say, does our current concept meet the next evolution, essentially? And that's what we're doing even 8 months in. We're saying, how is this going to evolve, and how are we going to be at the forefront, not behind it? Yeah, essentially.
I think that's so important, man. Like, because basically what you're talking about is pivots. And I worked for a company that when this all started, refused to make any adjustments whatsoever.
Yeah.
And the number one thing is, like, think about mobile car detailing, like Mauricio with MC's Royal Detailing.
Great company.
Think about food delivery, to your house, or cleaning companies even. They're coming to your home. They're doing this stuff. And before, they were already, social distancing. They were already cleansing. They were already sanitizing. The guy we interviewed, Donovan, with DIV Cleaning Service.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, they do the gutter cleaning. He started offering some sanitizing and pressure washing services. These are all pivots. Hey, we're sanitizing. We're taking precautions, this, that, and the third. Even though those were things that they were already doing before the stuff kicked off, they changed their pivot towards the pandemic, or basically, digging into the curve was changing their marketing to their customer. So changing that wording, adjusting how they're communicating, what services they offer. And the company that I worked for that refused to make any of those pivots constantly, we were having appointments cancel, this, that, and the third. I don't feel safe. That I don't want to do it right now. I want to postpone whatever. And all of those cancellations, when all we had to do was add that one extra step in there that's like, hey, you don't even have to be home. We don't even have to come in your house. We can maintain that distance. We can maintain that safety. And that's just one piece of marketing where you were talking about, Nick, like the pivots. You're basically projecting where are things headed and what can we do now to prepare for that. I think that's super important for businesses.
So my first career was in restaurants, and I have a lot of friends that are in restaurants today. And listen, I know a lot of you all are hurting out there. There's no doubt about it. But when we thought about the topic for this show in terms of starting a business in the middle of a pandemic, if you're thinking about starting a restaurant right now, it could be a great time to start a restaurant right now. But back to market research, if you're thinking about starting a restaurant right now that relies heavily on people coming in and sitting down,
that's not the way to do it.
Bad, right? If you're an entrepreneur and you own a restaurant right now and you're not thinking about, and I know a lot of my friends are, thinking about how well does my food travel? Not just how good my food is, but how does it travel? Then you're already out on the forefront, and your business is going to survive this, and you're going to go even deeper because let's face it, there's going to be a certain amount of people that after this pandemic are not going to go out to eat anymore, but they are going to pick up food because, like we were talking about earlier, I'm tired of eating my own food, man. I want to eat somebody else's food, but I do want it to travel well in terms of that. And I read a really good article this week, again on Medium.com, about TJ Maxx and Marshalls.
Nice.
And how they took a huge hit. Their stock price almost went in half when the stay-at-home orders came in. But guess what they haven't done in the past 10 years? They really haven't made the pivot to e-commerce.
Right.
Really.
Why? Because they have a concept where people want to come out, they want to get to the store because they hunt for bargains in those stores. So not only did their model evolve to the fact where not everyone was probably telling them and breathing in their ear, you need to move online. They probably said to themselves in a boardroom somewhere, no, we don't. And they're proving that even in a pandemic, because they had a really solid business model, that they're thriving right now because the people that do want to get out of their house, still socially distanced though, want to go to a store like that versus another store where they just don't see the same value.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like you said earlier, it's a marathon. And, I think that any successful entrepreneur, when you look at some of the best ones of our time, be it Jeff Bezos or Steve Jobs, they always are abreast of what's going on in their industry and always looking ahead of the curve to see like how things are changing in society in addition to the actual industry, and as you're able to make those pivots like you talked about. I mean, it's definitely one of those ongoing processes. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon.
Yep. So from a market research standpoint, Gavin, like I know you've been heavily involved in not just e-commerce, but the auto industry as well as real estate. Like what are some things that you've learned? What are some different successes or failures you've seen from a market research standpoint?
Well, I think from a market research standpoint, I mean, I think it's just like anything else. You just have to pay attention to the data. I'm someone that's strictly driven by the data and using data to actually make decisions, because I think that anytime you get emotions involved in it, you're always going to make a bad decision. But anytime that you're relying strictly on the data, and it doesn't, you can insert any industry into it. For example, if we're talking about automotive, when it comes to actually one of the things I'm in charge of is going out to buy inventory. It doesn't matter what I like. It matters what sells and what sells quickly. So I have the quickest velocity, as far as that turn. If you relate that to real estate, it doesn't matter what I like. It matters what other people like. I may not like gray and white right now in kitchens, but that's what's trending. So guess what? That's what that's what customers are looking for. Then that's what you need to, if you're going to do a remodel and you're planning on, or you're doing a rehab, that's what you need to put in there if you plan on renting or selling a house. So I mean, it's just relying on that data, and taking yourself and your emotions out of it, and relying strictly on that data.
That's awesome.
I love that.
That reminds me of basically just bringing us full circle to you talking about, Nick, is setting up the store and having everything out in the open. It doesn't matter what you like, but what was working was having it open, having it out, having an attractive display where, your store's not a wreck. It's very professional looking. It's spaced appropriately. You have the sample tables set up. So it's phenomenal because this is welcoming and it works.
Thanks for that, and we put a lot of thought into that. And I know what we're talking about here in terms of market research. Again, I know we're going to set up our next show essentially around this, but we're going to talk about in a future episode around, okay, how are you going to get funding for your business? Right. And whether it's going to your wife, kind of like I did, and say, hey, listen, I think I have a really good idea here, and she's the most supportive woman on the planet, and we're going to take X amount of our savings and invest in this, or whether you're going to a bank, a personal friend, it doesn't matter. And again, if it's on paper, great. If not, that's okay too. But that story is going to flow a lot better when you're talking to your friend, investor, et cetera, when you say, this is not just a great idea. The market supports it, and this is who I'm going to go after within that market. Okay, right. The investor is going to listen to you on a much deeper level because, like you said, Gavin, before, which is brilliant. Data does drive decisions, right? And especially if you're going to an outside source for funding, they want to see data-driven decisions. So if you're thinking to yourself, why market research is important, that's just another reason why it's important, not only to get your business off right, but if you want to fund it, it does give you credibility in terms of that.
And I think that's a perfect segue. So if you've learned anything from what we talked about for market research, then that's great. Go ahead, tell your friends, subscribe.
Please.
Share the episode. Our number one goal here is talking about starting a business in the middle of a pandemic.
Yes.
Something that would probably just be nuts to your average person, but to an entrepreneur, to a business owner, it's something that has to happen, something that needs to happen, and something that we want to help with. So it sounds like we're talking about funding in
Yeah.
our next episode.
I
This
like
is super exciting.
Yeah.
This is super exciting because I'm more of a bootstrap guy. I know you've done a little bit of the personal investment
Yes,
yourself,
yeah.
Kevin. And Nick, I know you said you have some investors. So we
Yeah.
have a
Yep.
very wide range here. This is really exciting.
I'm excited about this. Again, we are here to help. That's why we started this podcast, is to help. So if you need us, our contact information is in the show notes. The resources we talked about are in the show notes, and we mean it sincerely. We want to help. So if you got a question or if you got a topic that you want us to cover, reach out to us. If you need some one-on-one time, reach out to us. We want to help you take that burning idea into execution. But I'm really looking forward to the next show with you guys as well,
Awesome.
too.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Thanks again,
Kevin.
Nick and Ryan. Appreciate
Thanks,
it.
Nick.